They said he wasn't anything special, just another quiet man with a trembling hand and a dog he leaned on more than most would understand. The kind people walk past without thinking twice, like the world had already decided his chapter was over. But that all changed the moment someone maced Shadow. It happened on a Sunday morning at the Union Street Farmers Market, sun soft overhead, booze buzzing with life, the scent of fresh herds and honey bread trailing through the breeze. Michael Cruz, 36, former Army Ranger, 6 deployments, was walking slow, his back straight despite the stiffness in his joints, and beside him moved Shadow, his black Labrador with the amber eyes and the do not pet service dog vest stitched tight across his chest. Michael had trained Shadow himself after the last VA therapist told him therapy might not be enough. Shadow knew when to press close, when to apply pressure, when Michael's thoughts started slipping sideways into deserts and doorways that didn't exist anymore. They were a team, not just by function but by need, by bond, by survival. And if you've ever believed that no veteran should be mocked for depending on something that saved their life, then like and subscribe, because what happened next should never happen to anyone. She came out of nowhere. A woman in a wide-brimmed hat and pearls, a floral tote swinging from her shoulder, stopped in front of Michael's booth. He was checking the label on a jar of elderberry jam, Shadow calmly lying beside him. "Dogs shouldn't be near food," she snapped. Michael, polite as always, simply gestured to the vest. "He's working," but her lip curled like the word offended her. "That's not a real dog. That's just a prop. You people fake this for sympathy." Before he could even process it, her hand darted into her tote, and the hiss of aerosol filled the air like a snake uncoiling. Shadow yelped. Michael dropped to his knees as if shot, arms thrown around his dog, trying to cover his eyes, trying to remember how to breathe. The market stopped. Some gasped. Some pulled out phones. But no one moved, not at first. "You can't assault a dog," someone stammered. But she stood there proud, like she'd done something righteous, like justice had been served to an inconvenience. Shadow's body trembled in Michael's arms, and that's when the past started bleeding through. Flashbangs in dark rooms. Screams over radios. Limbs gone limp. His breathing turned jagged. Shadow, even in pain, tried to press his weight into Michael's chest, doing his job, despite the burn in his eyes and the panic crawling across his skin. And then, out of the edge of the crowd, a man stepped forward. Civilian clothes. Steady eyes. A leash clipped to his belt. "He trained that dog," the man said, voice quiet but cold. "And I trained mine to stop hostage takers in 7 seconds." He pulled out a badge, SWAT K-9 division, and knelt beside Michael with the care of someone who'd done this before. "What's his protocol?" "Dual cert PTSD and mobility," Michael whispered, barely able to keep his voice even. "Shadow. His name's Shadow." The handler nodded. "Mine's Rex. We've got you." He signaled to a nearby vendor. "Call Animal Trauma Response. Tell them SWAT protocol override. This isn't a drill." Then he turned to the woman, who now looked a lot less confident as the weight of what she'd done began to sink in. "You just assaulted a protected federal service animal under ADA Title II, and a combat veteran. That's not just rude. That's a felony." Her eyes darted around for someone to take her side. But the phones were still out. No one was laughing. No one was helping her. She tried to walk away, but the handler raised his voice. "Stay right there." Backup arrived 5 minutes later. She was cuffed without drama. Shadow was taken for emergency care. Michael stayed kneeling the entire time, whispering soft phrases to his dog. "You did good, buddy. I've got you. You did good." Later, people would ask what made the SWAT handler step forward, and he'd just say, "You don't let someone hurt your own kind. Doesn't matter if they walk on 2 legs or 4. And when Shadow finally returned home, eyes bandaged, tail still weakly wagging, Michael pulled out an old Shadow box from the shelf above his mantel. A box he hadn't opened since the day he came back from the sand. Inside were ribbons no one had asked about. A commendation signed by a colonel no one knew. And next to it, now placed with solemn care, was a new patch. Shadow. First to fight. First to heal. Because some dogs don't just guard the door. Some hold the whole damn soul together. There's a kind of silence that follows pain, not the loud kind full of sirens and shouts, but the hollow one, the kind that hums under your skin and makes even birdsong feel like it's intruding. And that's what settled over the small veterinary emergency trailer parked behind the market. as I sat on a fold-out bench watching Shadow breathe through the burn. They said he'd be okay, maybe some temporary corneal damage, but they couldn't be sure yet. All I knew was that his tail still thumped whenever I said his name, even as the vet dabbed solution over his swollen eyes. My hands were shaking again, that slow internal earthquake I could never seem to stop, except when Shadow used to lean into my chest like he was anchoring me to the floor. But this time, he was the one in pain, and I was useless. I could hear people outside still murmuring about that dog, and that woman, and that vet guy who collapsed like a sack of bricks, and part of me wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just sat there, staring at Shadow, whispering the same 3 words I used to say into a satellite phone during blackouts overseas, still with me. And every time, he'd twitch his paw, and that was enough. The door creaked open behind me, and in stepped the SWAT handler from earlier, Leon, I think he said. He carried himself like someone who'd seen every kind of chaos and still knew exactly where to stand when it showed up. "Shadow's tough," he said, nodding toward the table. "You trained him right." I nodded. We trained each other. He didn't say much else. Just crouched down beside the exam table and slipped something out of his jacket pocket, a small velvet pouch, the kind they give out at handler funerals. He placed it in my hand. "For him. When he's back on his feet." I opened it. Inside, a challenge coin, military polished and inscribed, "For valor without voice, K-9 Unit Brotherhood." I looked at him. "You don't give these to civilians." He just smiled faintly. "And Shadow's not civilian. Neither are you. You just dress like one now." I didn't cry. I don't. But something in my throat felt like it was caving in. "Why'd you step in?" I asked. "You didn't even know us." Leon leaned back on his heels. "Because someone once told me you never let your own go down without backup. Doesn't matter if it's war, street, or market stall." And then he paused, like something else was sitting on the edge of his tongue. "Besides, I knew Shadow." My heart stopped. "Knew. Back in training," he nodded. "Joint facility in Nevada. He failed tracking once. Wouldn't take the bait. Turned out he was waiting for the real handler to come through. That was you, wasn't it?" I remembered the day Shadow wouldn't leave the gate. Sat there like a statue while the instructor barked commands. They called him broken. I called him mine. Leon stood. "Dog knew before we did. That's not failure. That's loyalty." I watched him go, his own K-9, Rex, a thick-coated Belgian Malinois, waiting outside the door like a sentinel. I looked back at Shadow. Still with me. Another twitch. Another heartbeat. Outside, the woman who sprayed him was already on her way to being booked. I heard later she tried to argue she was defending herself. From what? No one could say. But it didn't matter. The law was clear, and Leon had made sure every word was followed like gospel. Assaulting a service animal was a federal crime. Period. But what they couldn't legislate, what no courtroom could ever really quantify, was what had been stolen in those seconds: the trust, the rhythm, the quiet tether between us. I'd spent years building it with Shadow. Now I had to rebuild it. Not with treats. Not with commands. With time. And he deserved every second of it. That night, I didn't sleep. Just sat beside his crate on the floor, fingers resting through the wire door. Sometimes he'd stir. Once, he whined softly, like chasing something in his dreams. I didn't wake him. I just whispered, "We're safe. I promise." In the morning, a delivery showed up at my door. No sender listed. Just a box, and inside, a replacement vest, custom-stitched, black nylon and Kevlar. But this time embroidered in gold thread. Shadow, first to fight, first to heal. I found a note tucked in the side. "He's not just a dog. And you were never just a man with a leash. L." I hung it beside my old Shadow box, the one from deployment I hadn't opened in years. I still hadn't. But somehow, I didn't need it anymore. Because now, Shadow had one of his own. It took 3 weeks for Shadow's eyes to clear, 3 weeks of soft lights, special ointments, and short walks at dusk when the sun didn't sting and the world moved slower, gentler, like it finally understood him. But it wasn't just his sight that needed healing. It was the rhythm between us. The unspoken trust. The signal loops veterans like me depend on when words get lost in noise. I watched him during those days like he was a compass I was trying to recalibrate, not because he forgot how to do his job, but because he was still trying to do it even when he couldn't see. That's what broke me the most. Not the pain, not the vet bills, not the cruelty, but the way he still pressed his shoulder against my leg in tight doorways, still curled around my feet during nightmares, still waited for my hand every time I stood like he could feel my pulse asking for direction. He never failed me, even when we had every excuse to fall apart. By the end of the month, we returned to the same market where it all happened. Not for revenge. For normalcy. For closure. I clipped on his vest, the new one, black and gold, crisp and firm against his coat, and walked with him under the same archway where the world had tried to humiliate us. Some people recognized us. One or two nodded quietly, unsure what to say. I didn't need them to say anything. Just their silence was enough. Respect doesn't have to be loud. But one face in the crowd wasn't silent. Officer Leon Barrett stood beside a coffee truck, his sweat badge clipped to his belt, and Rex, the K-9 with the glacier eyes, sat perfectly still beside him. Leon gave a single nod. I returned it. And as I passed, Rex gave a soft huff, like dogs do when they know something you don't. Shadow responded with a tail flick, just one. That was enough. The woman who maced him? She was facing court now. 3 charges pending, and the city attorney had already called me twice to prepare a statement. I kept it simple. He wasn't just a dog. He was my anchor. And she tried to sever that. That's all I needed to say. That night, Leon invited me and Shadow to a Handler Memorial upstate, a quiet ceremony at a decommissioned K-9 field, where plaques lined a stone path like graves that never needed names spoken aloud. It wasn't a show. No reporters. Just silence, boots in the grass, and handlers with calloused hands laying worn vest beside marble. I stood back until Leon gestured me forward. "You're one of us," he said. "You always were. You just didn't know it." Shadow stood by my side, posture firm, eyes nearly healed, gaze scanning the crowd like a soldier on duty. A woman approached, older, graying, with a uniform that looked folded by memory more than regulation. She looked at Shadow, then at me. "That your partner?" she asked. I nodded. "Then you salute him first," she said. "That's the rule." I froze, not quite sure what she meant. She smiled gently. "He already did it for you. Every time he didn't move when the world tried to break you, that was his salute. Return it." And so I did. Not formally. Not with military flair. Just a moment. My hand to my chest, a breath held, a pause long enough for him to feel it. Shadow didn't move. He didn't need to. The moment held. That's all we wanted. That's all we ever wanted. Back home, I finally opened my shadow box. First time in over a decade. The desert sand still clung to one of the medallions. My name, barely visible on a rusted pin. And tucked underneath it, the last letter I ever received before my discharge. "Sergeant Cruz, you're no longer in uniform, but the fight isn't over. Walk slow, carry steady, and never let the world convince you your quiet isn't strength. Colonel DM." I slipped the new patch inside. Right next to it, I placed Shadow's training photo, the one where he was barely 6 months old, oversized vest, sitting like the floor was sacred. The next morning, I received a call from the mayor's office. Someone had seen a photo from the Handler Memorial. Shadow sitting still as stone, gold-threaded vest glowing in sunrise. They wanted to issue a commendation. I declined, told them to donate to the local K-9 unit instead. But I agreed to one thing, a bench at the market. Bronze plaque, fixed in the stone. It reads, "In honor of the ones who never bark for attention, but stand anyway." Below it, in smaller letters, Shadow, first to fight, first to heal. I walk by it every week. Sometimes with Shadow, sometimes alone. But every time, I hear it. The sound no one else can. Not applause. Not sympathy. Just silence. The kind that listens. The kind that respects. The kind that finally understands. He wasn't just a dog. He was the soldier who saluted first,